So good morning, everybody. We'll start shortly after 11 o'clock. Can I just ask you to switch off your cameras and mute your mics unless you'd like to ask a question? And as we go through today's webinar, if you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand and we'll come to you. So we're just letting a few more people join us, and we'll start shortly after 11 o'clock. So we have a few more guests arriving, and we'll start in a minute or so. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to September's webinar after a short summer break. I hope you've all enjoyed the sunshine as we have as a team through August. So today we're going to cover the topic of how net zero carbon is changing the way we do business. And we have a fantastic guest panel. We have Alison Foster from Royal Berkshire NHS Foundation Trust and Kevin Boniface from Buoy Energy and Services. And I'm delighted to welcome them both to today's discussion. So Ali is the Programme Director at Royal Berkshire NHS Foundation Trust for their Building Berkshire Together programme. And that's the name for the redesign and development of the Trust facilities to provide the very best health care and well-being services for their population. And the work that Ali's doing is part of Boris's HIP2 programme. Ali says it's a fantastic opportunity to modernise the built environment in partnership with the local community, business and academia, and to be a leader in the growth of a greener, more sustainable local economy. Ali has worked with the NHS for almost 30 years, starting as a mental health nurse and service manager, and she's also worked in commissioning as a director of nursing and quality and has led numerous large-scale transformation projects. She is very passionate about community engagement and empowerment and enjoys working closely with the voluntary sector, and has previously been a chair of a local health watch. Ali is also the trust lead for the redevelopment of the Green Plan for net zero carbon. More about that later in our discussion. And Kevin Boniface is a mechanical engineer who's worked within the energy sector for over 20 years, providing consultancy, design and engineering support, particularly to carbon reduction projects across all sectors of our economy. Prior to that, he was working within refrigeration and air conditioning industry, when he had an epiphany and decided to swap focus from specifying energy consuming kit and to focus on identifying and implementing energy reduction and carbon reduction projects. He's passionate about the decarbonisation of heat and heat networks, and focuses on developing business development opportunities and delivering project engineering and support to the energy and FM teams at Buoy Energy and Services. So welcome to both our guest panel. For those of you who don't know me, I'm John O'Brien, the MD and founder of LCMB, and I'm joined today by my colleague Mike Kenny, who's a managing consultant within our carbon and energy reduction teams. And our mission at LCMB is to create great working, learning and healing environments for our clients, and to transform the impact that workplaces, buildings and estates have on the life of our client organisations, their people and customers. So today, our objective is to discuss net zero and look at the way it's changing the way we do business and how organisations can use net zero to improve their organisations' outputs. So by way of scene setting, I think it's useful to start with maybe just a little bit of a definition as what we mean by net zero carbon. And a very useful picture and definition It's the whole life carbon net zero vision produced by the World Green Building Council. So essentially, net zero carbon means that we minimize the sort of energy and carbon emissions from our organizations, the buildings and everything we do, get them to a minimum level, and then offset those emissions in some way so that the net effect of our activity means there's no addition of carbon to the atmosphere. And the way that World Green Building Council, the UK government, and most private sector and public sector organisations are looking at net zero carbon as two key components. There's net zero operational carbon, which means the carbon that gets emitted as a consequence of your ongoing activity, and net zero embodied carbon, which is the carbon that's embedded in all of the things that you put in place, such as your buildings, the bricks, and so on. So the focus is very much about thinking about, as you expand or build your organizations, how you reduce the embodied carbon, and as you operate your organizations on an ongoing basis, how you minimize the energy use, the carbon emissions, so that your ongoing impact on the environment is minimized. I think, again, in terms of context, I think the NHS offers a great case study as to how to put net zero carbon front and center of your organizational strategy. The NHS is now committed to delivering net zero carbon for the scope 1 and 2 emissions, which are the sort of direct emissions from fossil fuel facilities, anaesthetics, their fleets, and they're indirect from electricity, waste, water, metered dose inhalers to zero by 2040. And the scope 3 emissions to net zero by 2045. And that essentially means all of those people are working at the boundary of their organisation, providing services such as medicine, the food and catering and the like. And what the NHS has done is looked at the sources of carbon emissions within their organisation and thought about where the bulk of those emissions come from. So, for instance, the estates and facilities is about 20%, 10 to 20% of overall emissions, whereas medicine and chemicals produce up to 20%. And what the organisation has done at a UK level is looked at all of the carbon emission components and started to think about how they could reduce those to net zero and re-engineer the way that they do things. And they've focused in on medicines as a major contributor of carbon. So they're looking to reduce the carbon intensity of surgical anaesthetic gases, of inhalers. They're looking at their fleet and transport plans to create green travel plans. They're looking at their energy to ensure that it's renewable and green. And they're looking at modern ways of working in terms of hybrid working, distance working, remote working, and delivering telemedicine. So I think if we're looking for an exemplar case study as to how to think about putting net zero carbon front and centre of what you do as an organisation, the NHS is an excellent example of demonstrating how you can do this to improve patient experience, safety, staff health, wellbeing, and clinical outcomes. So hopefully that's given us a little bit of context. And what I'm going to do now is pass to my colleague Mike Kenny, who will introduce Ali and Kevin and have a discussion around how net zero carbon is impacting our organisations and what we can do to help it improve how we do things. So over to you, Mike.
Thanks very much, John, and hello to Ali and to Kevin. First of all, thanks very much for joining us on our webinar, and we really appreciate it. Just to begin with, could I ask you to share a little bit more about your role, each of you, and your responsibilities for net zero carbon in your own organisations? Let's start with Ali.
I'm on mute. Hi, thanks for having me and for the opportunity to share some of the work that we're doing here at the Royal Berks. My role is the Programme Director for the hospital redevelopment. So, and part of that is to lead on the net zero carbon green plan. And as an NHS, we are developing our plan for the end of this financial year, but there's a few stages that we have to go through as individual trusts and systems. So I'm leading on the plan for our trust, which needs to go through the board, and then we send it to region, and it then becomes part of a national plan that the NHS are committed to. And part of what I will be doing as well is looking at for our options for our new development. So we're looking at options for a new site on the site, and we're looking at options off site for a new hospital, and measuring and making sure that whatever we do, we are making sure that our carbon footprint is considered throughout. And in fact, what's been helpful for that is we're developing our business case, and we're at the outline business case stage, and there's been new guidance issued by the Treasury for the Green Book, which you go through, which includes in 2020 includes strengthening our commitment to net zero carbon in some of our options. So it actually strengthens the case that we make if we demonstrate that we are on track to deliver a net zero carbon as we planned. So that's my role, and we've just kicked off the planning process internally, and it's got a huge amount of enthusiasm, as you'll know, because you guys have been working with me, and we've had people. We only kicked it off this month with staff, and we've had staff volunteers come forward, but we've also had staff tell their friends and family what we're doing, and we've had people in the community come and say, you know, I work in sustainability, or I work in engineering, and I'm really keen to come and help you, because obviously, as the largest employer in the area, and most of our staff who work here live in the areas as well, it's something that the community feel passionate about. So quite excited about what we can achieve. So we've got until December to develop our plan, which is our 3-year plan, and I'm leading on that. So yeah, it's a bit about what I'm doing.
Brilliant, thanks, Ali. So how many staff have you got there? Is it a few thousand, isn't it?
Yeah, we've got about 5,000. Some are in different sites, but in the trust there's around 5,000 staff. So yeah, quite a lot.
Excellent. Kevin, can I ask you the same question?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to be on this. So my role is I kind of sit within the energy team at Bouygues Energy and Services. We have a separate sustainability and environment team, and I guess corporately at Bouygues, they look after our carbon targets, environmental reporting that is done as a corporate kind of thing. So I don't get massively involved with that, but my role really is can be supporting them in what they're trying to do, but also on the energy side, we are developing and identifying projects.
I don't know if that's your internet connection or ours, but Kevin seems to have frozen.
Yeah, I can hear you, but Kevin's frozen.
Okay, well, let's just keep going.
Happens to us all.
I know, it's terrible. What I find really difficult is sharing slides at the same time as talking, but that's another thing. Let's just continue with the questions, and hopefully Kevin can come back to us. So Ali, the UK government has described climate change as a business opportunity like no other, and 2021 is the year of climate action. What do you think?
I do think. Oh,
sorry.
Kevin, you're back.
Sorry about that. My connection decided to throw me off. I don't know why. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Have you carried on without me, or shall I?
No, we went. That's fine.
Yeah, if you want to continue introducing yourself, that's fine.
Sure. Hopefully that won't happen again. So where did I get to? So yeah, I sit in the energy team, and we're kind of involved in. My role is really a mix of business development and energy development, I guess the best way to explain it. And I spend about 50% of my time doing business development and 50% of the time working on site operational kind of projects. So an example of that would be we do a lot of work around the Cambridge area at the moment. We've got an energy services framework and developing energy performance contract kind of projects through Cambridge. And we are working on a rural heat network project, which is where we are connecting up potentially a lot of 300 to 400 dwellings to a heat network, which is going to be driven by heat pumps. And it's the first rural heat network in the country, or it was when it was conceived. So that's literally just started on site. So I'm involved in it as an operational level in kind of helping to sort out various issues that have cropped up with that, because it is a complicated project. There are 15 contractors involved in it. So I can spend my day going from one thing where I'm trying to coordinate with the heat pump manufacturers, and also then trying to sort out a fire hydrant issue around that. And then on the other side of the day, I could be working on a business development opportunity for a university or an FM contract. So my role is kind of a floating role, and I do enjoy it because of that reason. But in terms of what we're trying to do as a corporately in terms of net zero carbon, I'll talk about the targets we have a little bit later on. But I do sit on a carbon panel where we kind of steer and provide input to the carbon reduction opportunities that we can and measures that we can implement internally and corporately. So I do sit on that, and I do support that extensively. So that probably is the best introduction I can think about saying at the moment.
That's great, Kevin. Thanks very much. Just for your benefit, because I guess you probably didn't hear the first question I asked, I'll just ask it again. UK government described climate change as a business opportunity like no other, and 2021 is the year of climate action. Do you agree? Let's start with Ali on that one.
Well, I guess yes. I know there's a lot of cost involved in some of this, but actually, when I'm looking locally at some of the work that we're doing, there's a lot of opportunity to grow our local businesses. So we're looking at, how do we redesign, how do we procure services to make sure that we're buying them from in the UK, but actually locally we're looking at connecting with our business networks. We've started discussions with people like Connect Reading and Reading UK and the local Thames Valley local enterprise partnership, and they're all like really keen to see what is it that we could do in terms of changing the way that we work to increase our spending power locally rather than trying to import loads of things. So I think yes, I would agree that there is a business opportunity in that sense.
And Kevin, do you see it as a business opportunity like no other?
Yes, I think this is going to sound slightly ridiculous, but I'd describe myself as a bit of a slightly skeptical optimist, and the skeptic in me would probably treat the second part of that statement with a pinch of salt. 2021 is a year of climate action. I think that I tend to think that is kind of linked to the fact that we're going to be presiding over COP26 in November, and it seems like a bit of a marketing strapline to kind of fit in with that. So. Yeah, that's the kind of skeptical part of me. But the optimist is that there's definitely a huge amount of momentum behind net zero now and climate change. A lot of pressure on the UK government to kind of back up the long-term rhetoric that it's been coming out with over the last few months and in the last couple of years, but actually back that up with actual short and medium-term hard policy. And that's what we've been lacking, is the actual policy and the measures and the grants, the incentives and anything else that can actually help to achieve these things. It's one thing saying these messages, but it's actually backing it up. So the proof is in the pudding. There's bound to be a whole raft of announcements on the build up to COP26, I would have thought, and perhaps during that. But in terms of the business opportunity like no other, I mean, the Committee for Climate Change did a lot of really good work at the end of last year and did a lot of webinars that I attended a few of those earlier on this year. And I think the figure they came up with was that the impact on GDP to the UK by embellishing, kind of getting involved with this as a business opportunity is something like 0.5%. I think it's between 0.5 and 0.6% on GDP year on year if we transition to a net zero economy. So the actual impact is not as huge as people think it is, and the impact of actually building that net zero economy and the businesses that will come out of that, the opportunities that will come out of that are significant. And I would certainly embellish that and endorse it. I definitely think that it's the way to go, and I think if everyone gets on board with climate change and the technologies that are here now and the ones that will develop in the future, I think there's a huge opportunity for businesses. Absolutely massive.
And looking at your own business, what impact has the net zero target had on Bouygues?
Well, it's certainly, galvanized engagement and action across a lot of parts of the company. I mean, Bouygues is a huge global enterprise. We are 33 billion across the whole world in terms of our turnover, and it's mainly a construction engineering firm. So you look at our kind of footprint, our carbon footprint. It's in 2019, it was just under 3 million tons. And only 11% of that footprint was down to scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. So heating buildings, business travel, train flights, that kind of thing, fuel used on construction sites. Only 11% of that 3 million tons is down to those kind of things. The other 89% is scope 3, indirect use, and that is much harder to, well, first of all, to quantify it and find out where it's all going, and also then to deal with it. So that's waste, procurement of products, construction materials. So for Bouygues as an entity, that's very hard to deal with, and we're going through an exercise at the moment of trying to just trying to measure that and understand where it's all going. And then that means a lot of engagement with our supply chain, and not just forcing our supply chain to give us the figures, but just saying, well, we'll work with you to develop that and improve your understanding of your own emissions at the same time to help us. So it's not an easy thing, and it's not going to happen overnight. But we started the process of doing that.
Totally agree with you about scope 3. That is a huge challenge for any organisation. I was involved in a crisp manufacturer a little while ago to measure the carbon footprint of a packet of cheese and onion, and it started from the potato being taken out of the ground to this crisp packet being put in the bin. But other methodologies would shrink that and say it should be just a production factor and where you're getting your potatoes from. So yeah, it's a huge challenge as to what the boundaries are on scope 3 and where you start and where you finish. Ali, have you sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that in terms of benefit to it. I would say some of the things we're seeing already are around our staff health and well-being. So getting staff to think differently, just for example, in one area around transport and travel. So there's been quite a lot of work done around some of that, and incentivizing people to either get the bus or bike or walk. So for example, we've created what we call a bike village. So that's opening soon. So people have lots more space to put their bikes and to have showers, and we've put all of those in. And some of the feedback that we've gotten, so for me personally as well, I don't bike, but I have started to walk. So it might sort of take me 50 minutes on a bus to get here, but or 45 to 50 minutes to walk, but to get a bus it's half an hour. Well, for that 15 minutes I'm getting 45 minutes exercise, and it's built into my day, and I feel good about it because I'm also contributing to my carbon footprint. And you multiply that by the amount of staff who are changing the way that they do things, and we're getting to work without imagine starting your day, stressing about where you're going to park your car and coming through all that traffic. And you've now changed the way you're doing things, partly driven by the carbon agenda. Now staff are saying, how much it's contributing to their health and well-being. So I don't think that impact can be underestimated, actually. So I just thought I'd add that to the impact in our organisation.
Yeah, I saw your travel plan, and I was quite impressed about the very high proportion of people who are getting a bus or walking to work. I mean, we know that parking is a bit of a nightmare in the first place, and travelling in down Caversham Hill into Reading, where the queue can be an hour long before to do half a mile. It's a good thing to think about walking into work. But what about paying for this net zero? I mean, there's a lot of things that we can do, which is behavioural change that at no cost whatsoever, and encouraging people to simply turn off the lights when they leave an office, for instance. But has your organisation committed money and resource to achieving net zero, Ali?
Well, yes and no. So we know that we will have to invest in that, but at the moment we're at the stage where we're developing the plan. So the plan will identify areas of priority and what investment we will need to make, and some investments will be better than others. They will invest and save money in the long term, and some we know that actually we're not going to get a return on that investment. It's just going to deliver what we need it to deliver in terms of reducing our carbon footprint. So, but we haven't got to that stage of quantifying it yet. But absolutely, we know that there is going to be some significant investment that we're going to have to make, and we're committed to doing that. So, yeah.
I mean, the nice thing I think is that the NHS in particular is showing a board level commitment. You know, there has to be a board level representative regarding net zero and sustainability. And although we don't tend to have energy directors on other boards, there is an increasing number. What about Bouygues? Have they got a button to commit to net zero?
Well, we certainly have additional people have been recruited, and members of staff do have where we have site operations staff, people on site on various contracts. Then responsibilities on their roles have changed, with regards to the energy and carbon. So that can be only down to things like having to report meter readings, but we're seeing a change in terms of roles and responsibilities for individuals. Where we have new contracts starting, there's energy managers being recruited for that. So with a specific focus on identifying and implementing energy reduction, carbon reduction measures at those sites. There's a huge uptick in the kind of panels and steering groups that have been created internally. I've already mentioned the carbon panel that's been created that I sit on. There's also a wider sustainability panel as well, and they're all being brought together with and they all report to senior leadership. So there's a lot of momentum around it. I think just the other thing to mention is that in terms of our targets, because of the difficulties with measuring, quantifying, and then dealing with our emissions through the scope 3 part in particular, the targets that we've made corporately are perhaps not as don't sound as ambitious perhaps as perhaps Alison's are and other kind of NHS trusts and other SMEs. Now our targets effectively are to reduce scope 1 and 2 emissions by 40% by 2030, and then a 30% reduction by 2030 on scope 3A, which is upstream. So that doesn't sound hugely impressive, but for a company like Bouygues, that is actually quite ambitious. And considering that 90% of those emissions are down to supply chain, that's going to be hard for us to deal with. So 75% of that really of our carbon footprint is down to the purchase of goods and services. So it's really all about supply chain. So we're going to have to put a lot of effort and resource into dealing with that, and that will take us on the road and the pathway to net zero ultimately. But we don't have there isn't a corporate target on that yet, and that's slightly disappointing. When I saw that we had a climate strategy released earlier on in the year, there was no mention of net zero in it. That was quite disappointing. But I think it's taken a step-by-step approach to it. So we will get there eventually.
Yeah, scope 3 again, is 90% of your business, but those are other organisations' scopes 1 and 2. So I think this whole supply chain and procurement policy is important as to how we progress forward. But in terms of paying for it, again, going back to that, I think it's great to see that the UK government is putting its money where its mouth is and given grant funding, not loan funding, but grant funding to achieve net zero. So they pledged £1 billion for the public sector decarbonisation scheme, which is now in state in phase 3. But that's part of a wider £12 billion plan. So as a country, do you think we can really afford that? Or is the government really committed to achieving net zero? I mean, other people might say that they're distracting us from Brexit and the pandemic, and net zero is getting headline news. What do you think?
Well, I think that yes, as I've mentioned in one of the other previous answers, I think we can afford it. I think there is. It's great to have all these incentives, and I think they are part of the plan. I get that, and the government is having to commit to net zero because there are various sticks and legislation that it has to do that. So I do, the kind of skeptic in me again comes out and says, well, the Climate Change Act is saying that they've got to have a carbon budget every 5 years. They are doing all right with their third carbon budget, which comes to the end next year. But then currently the predictions are that for the fourth carbon budget and fifth, they're way off track. So you know, they have a commitment to get to this legislative target of net zero by 2050. But as governments, as we all know, governments are only a short-term engine, aren't they? They're only around for 5 years or so, and then you know, they can set all the rhetoric, they can set all the targets, but it's actually they're thinking perhaps we haven't got to achieve that by 2050. That we're not going to be here then, so we'll pass it on to someone else. And that to me is well, it's a very short-termist way of thinking, but it's good to have, and it's essential to have those kind of legislative policies in the background that kind of ensure that each government that comes in will have to get to these carbon budgets, will have to achieve them, otherwise there'll be penalties. I think going back to the funding that's around, I think that the PSDS scheme is great. It's been very successful. There was something else that was a failure. The Green Homes Grant Scheme did not work very well and was pulled. So they're probably trying to look for things that are working and things that aren't. There's a bit of scratching around. That seems to me a bit of what the case is. I think they could listen to the Committee for Climate Change a lot closer. I think they have some extremely good individuals there that know what they're talking about. A lot of the policies there are very sensible. I think aligning with some of the things that they're recommending. For example, just doing a test on any policies that they have out, so making sure that a test is done to review, does this align with net zero? You know, before they actually do a consultation on something. That would be quite a useful thing to be doing. So there's more that can be done, certainly.
Well, although there's a lot of money there for PSDS, it has been hugely oversubscribed, and some of the applications have closed before they've even opened almost. So, yeah. Ali, what do you think?
I don't know about the. I get what you're saying about the short-termism of governments in some respect, but actually this is quite a big passion that the population feels strongly about. Now, I think if you look at the vote, the people sort of who gain seats, you know, the Green Party and independents who stand on a green ticket are you know, gaining momentum, and that's a big signal to politicians. So when they start not being able to deliver on some of these commitments when it comes to the next round, they could be in some. I think there's some trouble ahead, let's say, if they're not going to deliver, because the pressure that the community and population are putting on them is significant and is growing. So I'm optimistic. Maybe I'm too optimistic about how serious it's been taken. I do wish there was more investment in building our own renewable energy, building our own wind farms, building our own solar. You know, I think there's not enough. That needs to be done at a massive scale. And actually, you know, we're buying these things from abroad, which cancels out any you know, kind of benefits that we're getting. So, you know, why aren't the government looking at those massive business opportunities to invest in buying our own things sort of here in this country? So I'd be keen to see that, and there's not enough of that. This kind of piecemeal and that fund, I think, like you say, it's very oversubscribed, and I think we're going to come into it needs a lot more. But yeah, I'm optimistic that this is going to be high on any political agenda given come the next election.
And although the public sector seemed to be leading the way in achieving net zero, the private sector seems to be using very much as a marketing opportunity. So when I'm saying it's changing the way we do business, as Kevin said earlier, some of the private sector organisations almost using it as a marketing ploy. So Marks and Spencer have their plan A because there is no plan B. The Budweiser beer on the box, it says that it's all made with renewable energy, and Aldi have adopted a turtle as their mascot. I mean, Aldi as an organisation, they're good. They use ground source heat pumps in every new build. The LED lighting's in place. But is the turtle greenwash when they're still selling asparagus from Peru and spinach from Zimbabwe? Is this greenwash just there to attract customers and increase sales, or do you think they have a genuine desire to reduce emissions?
Shall I take that? Yeah,
Yeah,
I think one example comes to mind straight away is Brewdog, and I think the answer is a mix of the two things. I think that's partly greenwash, and jumping on and making a real business opportunity out of something, but also I think in Brewdog's case, I think there's a genuine desire to get to carbon neutral as soon as possible. In fact, they're carbon neutral already. They're already starting to take suck carbon out of the atmosphere, is their message, by planting forests in Scotland and things like that. So Brewdog have really jumped on it and made and really kind of as a carbon neutral beer, and that they've really made a big thing out of it. So and there's other companies that are kind of latching onto the message that this can generate us new income. This can generate revenue for us. So I think a lot of it in the early days was partly greenwash. I think Marks and Spencers were one of the forefront companies saying it. I'm not sure whether they saw it as an opportunity to generate more revenue, or whether they had an environmental kind of conscience about it. I think it was more the conscience at that point, because we were still talking about greening things rather than net zero at that point. This is 5, 6, 7 years ago, and the problem with when you're saying we're going to become a green company, what does that really mean? It doesn't mean anything, because it's not a quantifiable target. It's only when net zero has become more of a thing. We've had the Paris Agreement has kind of driven this really. Net zero is a quantifiable figure, for any company or any corporation. You can actually work out what that means. What is your baseline, and then work out how to deal with it. So it is much more tangible things to be able to deal with. Whereas greening means nothing really. It is greenwash, because there's nothing associated with it. So I think it is easier now for companies, private sector and also the public sector, just to be able to kind of work out where they're at and come up with an actual plan to deal with it. It's just having the government policy around it, and then incentives in the right areas, the money being given in the right areas to make it happen at scale.
I think to add to that, to come back a little bit to what we were saying about governments, I think I saw yesterday that on the national news that Primark were doing something similar. So they are committing to all of these targets, and that's good national advertising for them. And they're doing it because they're saying they want to do the right thing. But actually, they know that that's people's spending power is going to be attracted to companies that do that, and in the same way, your voting power will eventually end up doing similar things. So I think these are things that are playing not just to company conscience, but they are playing to people's spending power. And we shouldn't underestimate our spending power in trying to change this. So there's something about what we produce, isn't there, in terms of our carbon footprint? But what we consume is equally, if not more, important in terms of reducing this. Because if we really were savvy about what we spent our money on, we could make a massive difference. So anyway,
it's about information, isn't it? I mean, the information is becoming more apparent on, or where if you go into supermarkets now, there's much more information about where this product has come from. But the consumer is kind of driven by the retailers to a certain extent, and that's going to be, you can't really get away from that. But the more information becomes available, as the awareness raises on all these issues, then I think it's going to get easier for consumers to make their own decisions.
I think the retailer should be driven by the consumer. I mean, I make a personal choice of buying British vegetables from the aisles. Everything I look at, I want it to have come from Britain and as close as possible. I want to be buying Oxfordshire products and Warwickshire products. So that kind of food mileage certainly affects my decision. Jeremy Clarkson was in the news this week promoting the little red tractor. I mean, he's keen for people to buy his lamb, but judging by the queues to his farm, I don't think he'll take too long before you sell it. But yeah, does food mileage affect your decision, Ali?
No, I don't think all the time it would. I mean, to be quite honest, most of my shopping's done by my husband, so he would decide that, but he does walk to the shop to get it. And he does make conscious decisions about what's bought locally, but would he go out of his way to do that, or would I? Not at the moment. It's too easy to make an alternative decision. I'm changing. I'm definitely changing, but that isn't a driver to how I spend. But the more I learn and the more I know more about this and the more I get more involved in it, the more I'm changing. So it is a behavior change for all of us, including myself, to look at those things.
What about at the hospital? I mean, they do a lot of catering there. It's done in-house and it's done for a lot of patients. And you probably have one of the best reputations for hospital dinners. Has been
we've been rated quite highly recently in a in a visit. So yeah, absolutely, we've got really good catering facilities. Yeah.
And is there a conscious decision on where that food, where the ingredients are coming from?
I understand that there is, and we work actually quite closely. And there's as you'll know, there's work going on with our procurement team to help us to make those decisions easier to see and easier to procure, and look at what our current contracts are, and if we're in contracts, how do we change and move to contracts that are more sustainable, local, reduced mileage, footprint, all of those sorts of things. So I would say that they do, but I wouldn't hand on heart say that happens all the time. But that is a journey that we are starting to look at, and that we're now at the stage where we're baselining a lot of our stuff at the moment.
That procurement policy is all important, and you seem to be on top of it there. What about employee? Is there a procurement policy that considers the sustainability of the goods and services that you're buying?
Yes, there is. So sustainability is questions around sustainability form part of our onboarding system for new suppliers. So that has really happened over the last 12 months or so. So we do ask significant suppliers to provide information on the carbon footprint of the goods or the services that they are providing to us, and that's going to help us to help quantify the Scope 3 aspect of our overall carbon footprint. So that has certainly improved. And we have a third party that kind of helps us with that now. So yeah, that's definitely getting better, and I think that will only carry on as time goes on. There are policies that come down from the senior leadership at Bouygues in France to kind of drive that. So yeah, that's definitely improving, and there's more work's going to go on with that. I think we're certainly not at the end point yet, but it's certainly going to improve as time goes on.
I mean, there certainly seems to be a lot of different drivers and incentives for going green, whether it's kudos, financial, reduced carbon emissions, satisfying the stakeholders, marketing. What do you think is the most appealing driver for change, Ali?
The most appealing driver for change in our organisation?
Yeah.
I think people have a personal sense of responsibility. They know that if we don't change, that there's significant impact to our climate and our planet. I think as an organisation, we are what you call an anchor institution, or so we are a massive employer, have a strong sense of corporate responsibility, social responsibility, and as an organisation, we feel that as you do as leaders, really, is that we have to be role modeling some of this stuff. We have a responsibility to our local community to be doing it, and I think that's driving that sense of responsibility is driving a lot of the behaviour. So a personal one and also an organisational one.
From our perspective, I don't think that the driver for change really, in terms of yeah, both personally and also staff at Bouygues is really an appealing one. It's the obvious impact of climate change that we see all around us. I think that's the major driver. You know, we see fires and floods in Greece and floods all over the place, droughts. Those are the things that are driving. It's not opinion, but it's clearly it's all over the internet, it's all over the news, it's all over everything now, and it's an inescapable fact that the climate is changing, and we need to change our behaviours. And I think the population at large realises that and wants to do something about it, and that then feeds through into the corporate level, and you get many more conversations around what can we do about this, and suggesting products and various services or internet kind of driven solutions that are going to help to mitigate people's impact. So I think that's really the kind of driver. I think things like financial, probably the carbon footprint and reducing carbon targets, they're the main drivers within Bouygues as a kind of a more opinion driver. I think that's probably the main thing. But I think it's individuals' awareness of the impacts of climate change.
And I think, yeah, the individual's awareness is growing and growing as climate change becomes headline news. You know, we're not relying on Extinction Rebellion kicking up a riot and getting on the news, but you know, these fires, these floods, the extreme weather events, and the scientists that are doing their calculations, yeah, it's making a massive difference, and everyone is aware of it. The greater media coverage by far.
Mm.
I mean, there weren't many benefits to COVID-19 and the pandemic, but reduced carbon emissions were certainly one of them. We saw reductions in 25-30% during the first lockdown as people stayed at home, businesses shut, schools shut, and such like. So we saw reduced consumption right across the board, and there were dolphins swimming in Venice. And then the advice was to ventilate. So let's open all the windows during the last winter, during the last heating season. And gas consumption went up by about 25-30%. We might as well have been heating the streets, the car parks, the playgrounds through those open windows. But do you think there was a correlation between the pandemic and carbon emissions? Ali?
Well, I would say yes. So I get that, and it hasn't. I don't think it's cancelled itself out. But what it has done through the pandemic is that people have been forced to change their behavior. They've been forced to look at things that they previously, like with any behavior change, people don't like change, and it's quite difficult. It's got to be convenient. So looking at, you know, how do we reduce our carbon footprint by using digital more, you know, those kinds of things that actually have a longer term impact. So without the pandemic being here, we're seeing some reductions anyway in some of those things. So yeah, so I definitely think there's a correlation, probably that's backed up by something, but for me, the longer term impact has been really significant in what we've been able to achieve in terms of reducing our personal and organizational footprint.
Kevin?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with what Alison just said. I mean, I think the fact that the pandemic has driven a huge societal change to working from home has had a huge impact. You know, people are not going to offices as like they were. I mean, I know it's changing now, and certainly from a Bouygues perspective, we've had a recent instruction to go back to the office where you can, but it's not go back to doing exactly what you were doing before. It's perhaps doing it 60% of the time. So where you might have been going to the office 5 days a week, the kind of ambition is to go back 3 days a week. So there's a definite change and acceptance of working from home does not impact significantly on people's productivity or their abilities to do their work. In fact, in some ways, it's a recognition that it actually improves it. And that is down to different individuals, but I've worked from home for years and years and years. I do think there is a definite advantage in being in the office and talking to colleagues and meeting colleagues face to face. And I wouldn't want to lose that, but working from home is great, and that means that I can work productively from home, and that means that my carbon impact is significantly reduced because my office is in London and I live in Somerset, so I don't want to be going out there every week. If you know, that's a huge kind of impact carbon-wise, across the whole year. So there's definitely been, the pandemic has definitely brought that into people's conscience a lot more, and the conscience of organisations to be able to say to people, you don't have to come into the office every day. And then when you go into ventilation and that kind of thing, and it means that buildings perhaps aren't needed in the same way they were before. There might be so many people in there. The building services can be reduced in their operation. They can be controlled better, and that kind of thing. So there's the secondary effects of not having so many people in the office that are definitely going to have an advantage and a benefit from the pandemic.
Yeah, I totally agree with you in that working from home has actually worked. We are able to do it. We are, can be trusted. We're not just drinking coffee and watching TV all day.
No.
We're actually doing some work. But
I'll just turn the TV off.
The reduced amount of traffic, it has helped with the air quality as well. And I think meeting people, certainly first time, a face-to-face is always the best way to start. But after that, certainly the Teams and Zoom calls has worked really well, and it has had an effect in terms of reducing our carbon emissions. So it can only be a good thing. Okay, so I was going to, at this point, take some questions from the floor. So if there's anyone there that wants to ask something to Kevin and Ali, please do so.
So, Mike, while you're waiting for questions from the floor, I've got a couple of questions that I'd just like to put to Kevin and Ali. So, I guess two questions, and I'll just ask you both in turn. What do you see as the biggest benefit of targeting net zero carbon for your organisation, and where would you recommend that people actually start if they're only beginning on the journey? So I guess, Ali, can I come to you first? I mean, from Royal Berkshire's point of view, what do you think? I know it's mandated from the centre that you will achieve some targets, but alongside that, there's benefits, I think, for patients and so on. What do you see as the biggest benefit for the organisation of targeting net zero carbon over the coming years?
Well, I think sustainability, sustainability of our future. We can't afford to carry on the way that we are as a NHS trust that has to provide a public service for the population. We're not in a position to say, in a few years' time our business will fold and we'll go and do something else. If we're not. So I think if there's something around sustainability for us as a trust. And sorry, you asked something else about this.
Yeah. So the second question was if you were recommending for another organisation who hadn't yet started on the net zero carbon journey, where would you suggest they start?
Well, for us, obviously we're baselining some of the things that we've been asked to baseline, but for us, I think starting with asking and speaking to as many people as possible. Don't take this on go in a cave and take it on, because actually you'll find out there are people who want to make this work, and we've got developing a bit of an army here. So actually it makes it a little bit easier. So to come up with the ideas, to connect with people, to make it work. So you've got people who suggest things, but then they take it back to their ward areas or their office areas, and they say, right, I'm going to make this work. So I think the biggest thing for us was the engagement piece, and that's where we started.
Okay, thank you. And Kevin, from WE's point of view and both your customers' point of view, what would you suggest are the biggest challenge, the biggest benefits, of targeting net zero carbon?
Well, it's for Bouygues, this is obviously a bit different from Alison's situation. So as a construction engineering firm, the challenges are going to be, it's going to be a huge change in how we work and what we do. I mean, a lot of what Bouygues does is large scale construction. For example, we're involved in Hinkley Point nuclear reactor. So that's huge amounts of concrete going into that. So how do you build a nuclear reactor without using concrete? And obviously there's huge amounts of embodied energy in that. So there are big changes in how we do things and what how we work. And then there are construction methods. But we can transition from using concrete in buildings and to timber. So there is a target for Bouygues to increase, I think it's to 30% by 2025. So at least 30% of our projects that are being built, this is construction projects across the world, are using timber rather than concrete. So there's a change there. And the benefits of kind of getting to this point are, we have other parts of our business where it's more to do with energy generation and distribution of energy. We are involved with floating PV wind farm, floating PV farms, solar farms that are on bodies of water. There's Float Gen is a wind turbine that's floating that we've been involved in pioneering. So I think the energy kind of generation projects that we're involved in and are kind of shown as demonstrators, I think there's going to be a lot more of that. There's lots of potential for that to grow, and we could have corporately, we could stand to have a lot of growth in that area. So there are benefits from it, but there are also challenges, and it's really down to Bouygues. It's kind of getting that balance out right, really. So that's going to be the tough bit.
And from your point of view, what would you advise people if yet to start the net zero carbon journey? Where should they start?
Well, I think it has to be measuring where you're at. It has to be baselining. You have to know, what are your emissions at the moment? Where are you starting from? And I think as an engineer, you can never go anywhere unless you know where you're starting from. So it's quantifying that, and then once you have an idea of what you're trying to do, you have a target. Net zero is the target. We know we need to get to. You can then come up with a strategy to get there, and it's working out where your energy emissions are going, what the consumers, what are the large bits of kit that you have that are using energy. What bits do you have to target first? You're using lots of gas, you're using oil, whatever it is. You can then come up with a strategy to start dealing with that. And and it probably will be dealing with things, replacing bits of kit before they get to the end of their lifetime, possibly. Gas boilers may have gone in the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years, but they're going to have to be dealt with probably before they get to the end of their lifetime in order to help you decarbonise and move to electrification, heat pumps or even hydrogen perhaps in the future when it's available and is a practical option. But electrification of heat is going to be the big thing initially. So I think a lot of people that have heating systems that are gas fired, they're going to need to be looking at the heat pumps. It's in the short to medium term. It's the kind of way of making big savings on carbon emissions.
Okay, thank you for that, Kevin. If there's no further questions from the floor, I'm going to draw us to close. So I found that a really, really interesting discussion, guys. So thank you for your contribution. Just pulling a couple of things out of the conversation in terms of some closing thoughts. Kevin, I think you said net zero carbon's a tangible thing we can deal with, so we can actually measure our emissions and then decide how we move forward with that. And just to put some context to that, that's something we did as an organisation at the turn of the year, and we've managed to achieve net zero carbon by offsetting using forestry. But I think the offsetting piece is a piece that's going to develop, and particularly the Scope 3 piece, I think we've identified that as a challenge. As Ali said, focusing on net zero carbon and a more sustainable performance has delivered health and well-being benefits for staff and patients. And clearly, I think we've all said the zeitgeist, the general mood is a move in this direction. So our spending, voting, company conscience, etc., is pushing us in this direction. So it's a long-term trend, particularly with the legislation, investment and policy coming from government that we're all going to need to understand and get on board with. So I think some really good insights from today. Thank you again to Ali and Kevin for joining us and giving us their time and the benefit of their experience. For those that are interested, you can download some guidance on net zero carbon sustainable performance for buildings and associated infrastructure from our website. So the details are in the slides. And a date for everybody's diary. Our next webinar, which will be 11 a.m. Thursday, 28th of October. We're going to look forward. We're thinking about what happens when the sunshine arrives in 2050 2022 and we get past the current wave and the winter of COVID. So we're looking to the mega trends and the themes that we think will impact our workplaces, buildings and estates in 2022. So join us to learn about what we think and what our guests think you should be prepared for, how to get ahead of the curve and how to make your real estate work harder in 2022. So I'm going to draw us to a close. I'd like to wish everybody a thank you for joining us today, and please stay safe, and we'll see you in a month. And a particular thank you again to Ali and Kevin. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.